Let's talk manure. Usually people look at manure as an environmental liability, but if manure is applied at rates equal to or less than the nitrogen requirement of a crop, manure can produce more environmental benefits than commercial fertilizer. To further examine the scientific conclusion, a group of researchers decided to summarize the results of multiple studies based on manure substitution for fertilizer. Market Journal's Bridget Nelson was able to sit down with Nebraska Extension livestock environmental engineer Rick Koelsch to learn more about this research.
Manure has several components that have value to it. The nutrient value, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, probably the things that we look to most. But manure has carbon in it, unlike our commercial fertilizers, and that's really where manure, if it's used properly, selected for the right locations, it has an additional value far beyond commercial fertilizers. And so that's where we get both some environmental benefits and some economic benefits that we wouldn't have expected often.
To further investigate how manure can produce more environmental benefits over the usage of commercial fertilizer, an Asian research group examined 141 distinctive trials of comparing manure substitution with fertilizer from Asia, Europe, and the U.S. These trials included grain-related crops.
For the grain-related crops that it was used in, it was about a 5% increase in yield. Nothing very dramatic, but an increase in yield on average. They found that in situations where we apply manure at a rate that is less than nitrogen requirement of the crop, that is more than double that, above 10%. And so that was suggesting to us that there's probably a complementary connection between fertilizer and manure. The study also found some very interesting things environmentally, and we often are concerned of manure as an environmental liability, but used correctly, there's environmental benefits. One of those benefits is in terms of nitrogen losses into the environment. Manured soils, manured trials had lower nitrogen loss to surface and groundwater, which in Nebraska is very important. It also had less ammonia losses into the air. The last thing that this study pointed out to us was the change in the carbon in the soil. We know that manure adds carbon to the soil, and a lot of that carbon is really showing up as an increase in the microbial biomass. And the energy that manure brings is the food source for those microbes, and it just really causes an explosion of their population and their activity. And that explosion in microbial activity really leads to a lot of the soil changes and the benefits that we see environmentally.
Although manure helps the environment, applying too much manure can reverse its beneficial purposes.
Manure, if it's over-applied, just like any fertilizer, is going to become an environmental liability. So we need to apply manure not to exceed the nitrogen requirement of the crop. That would be the number one starting point. So that means that if we're going to put manure on, we need to estimate the nitrogen availability to the crop and then reduce the fertilizer by that same amount. So meeting the nitrogen requirement and not exceeding it. In fact, the study suggested that even stepping back maybe 50 to 75% of the nitrogen requirement would be the best place to apply. Then the second thing we need to consider is that when we apply at near a nitrogen rate, we're probably over-applying phosphorus, potassium, possibly some other micronutrients. So in particular, phosphorus is a water quality concern. So if we do not return to that same field with manure until the phosphorus levels have come back down to below what the crop needs, then we will not have an environmental concern from a phosphorus perspective. So those two steps are critical to ensuring that we get that environmental benefit as well as that economic benefit.